This program is brought to you by the partners of A Rood Awakening International. Help others find truth. Support A Rood Awakening International today.
The Greek language simply cannot articulate Hebrew concepts. Certain phrases and idioms just don't translate, and that's caused a problem because Greek translations are all we've ever known when it comes to the Gospels. But now we know that there were Hebrew originals, not just for the Gospel of Matthew, but for Matthew, Mark, and Luke as well. And tonight you will get an exciting preview of how the discovery of the Hebrew Gospels will forever change the face of Christianity. Because it's the end of the sixth day, the sun is set, and this is Shabbat Night Live. Well, Shabbat Shalom, Torah fans. Welcome to Shabbat Night Live with Michael Rood. If you think that what you read in the Gospels is all there is to understanding Yeshua, well, think again. The Hebrew Gospels were the real originals, and they articulated things from a Hebrew mindset that a Greek translation could never explain properly. And tonight you will experience why that is such a big difference. Michael Rood and Miles Jones continue with the third episode of 4 in Survival of the Hebrew Gospels. You can actually get this whole series on DVD and give it to friends and family around Hanukkah time, and that is a wonderful time to explain why you believe what you believe and help others to understand it with this great series. So make sure you order that soon and you'll get 20% off. Also, it's the second Shabbat of the 9th biblical month, known as Kislev, as seen on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. There you see it on your screen there, and that calendar goes all the way up to Passover, so still a lot of months left. And speaking of Passover, let's talk about that a little bit with the founder of A Rood Awakening International. Please welcome Michael Rood. Michael, welcome.
Good to be here, Scott, and I am very excited about Passover this year. We do have Tim Mahoney, who is going to be coming in, and this is what we've been really waiting for 20 years. This is what started him on the quest, the Red Sea crossing. And so he is going to actually be bringing his movie, The Red Sea Crossing, from the Hebrew perspective. He's going to be bringing that to Passover. We're going to see it before anyone sees it in the theaters. In May, we're going to be seeing it at Passover, and he's going to give us the behind the scenes. Very excited about this.
And this is a sequel to what he has from the Egyptian perspective coming out in February. Is that correct?
That's right. People are going to be able to see this, and we encourage them to go to the theaters, see this in February, and we will be giving an update on that. And then come to Passover, and that's when they get the whole boatload.
Okay, excellent. And there's more details coming soon. And for what we have right now, you can see it at PassoverCharlotte.com. I know for a fact you can book your hotel room right now. That is available right now, in addition to some of the other things.
Well, they better do it because this is going to be a full schedule.
Yes, and in fact, that's what happens sometimes when we go to these large events. The actual host hotel runs out of rooms, and we have to go to other surrounding hotels, and folks have to walk over. It's not a big deal, but it's not as convenient as it could be staying there.
Right, right. It's going to be convenient, but you want to get in there soon and register for Passover. People fly in from all over the world to be here. This is the greatest Passover since King Yoshia and Jeremiah put on Passover in Jerusalem.
And it will be, in fact. And in fact, it is this year, as it falls on the calendar, it's exactly the way it happened when Yeshua was crucified. So Passover is on the Wednesday, and it flows exactly on the days of the week as Yeshua experienced on that day. So you'll be able to talk about that, obviously.
That's right. And of course, we do our Passover on the weekend to better facilitate the schedules of people around the world.
Right. And on the Sunday is, I guess Saturday night specifically is when he arose.
Right? That's right. On Shabbat, that's when he arose. And then the firstfruits, raising the firstfruits from the dead, that would happen at sunset, the harvest of the firstfruits.
Okay. And that will happen exactly like it did too. So basically,
that's right. We'll
Sunday,
be there. We will be doing Passover at the time that the first fruits were raised from the grave. And then the following morning is when the first fruits were taken to heaven and presented before the throne room, just as we rehearsed it by presenting the first fruits of the barley in the temple. This is the real temple. These are the real first fruits. And this is the real time in which it happened.
That is so exciting. So yeah, make sure you get in on that at PassoverCharlotte.com. And Michael, something we always bring out at that time of year is the first fruits. And there's typically we want folks to recognize the first fruits as bringing in the first fruits of the harvest. That's what they did back in biblical times. They brought a first fruits of their harvest, basically the first parts of the crop that were ready, with no guarantee that anything else was going to even ripen or get destroyed by hail or anything like that.
That's right. It's the earliest grain, the barley, and that first fruits is really confessing our faith in the God of heaven to be our provision. And so we give of our first fruits without any guarantees.
Right. And that's the way it is even today for someone who has a normal job and gets paid every week or every 2 weeks. Really, that is their first fruits, because we're supposed to give the first and best of our increase. And these days we get an increase every week or second week or every month or however it falls. And we don't know if there's going to be another paycheck in our future. We really don't know. And so I think, we need to remember first fruits all year long. We need to be giving our first and best of every increase that we get, whenever that is. You know what I mean?
And we do this, our broadcast schedule, what we're putting out there, we are really being the provision for the Spanish, for the Chinese, for the Russian. All these languages that we're going into, they don't support themselves. We are the ones who have the abundance. We are the ones that are the provision for that. And really, we're doing this every single week. And every single week, we run real close to the edge. And people don't realize that, we can't wait till the first fruits of the spring, right, as in the days of yore, but we really depend upon people giving, and every week, to take the first fruits every week and sow where you're being fed, because we are sowing to the rest of the world. We are doing it. We're not raising money so someday we get to do something as we fly around in our jet and do some kind of ministry thing. No, we're doing it every single day, and we have to keep it full, keep the tank full, because we got to get to the next stop.
Indeed, and Jehovah does amazing things with one little seed, and he passes it all around the world in ways we couldn't even imagine. So Michael, thank you so much for bringing that to us today.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, new evidence is proving that the Gospels were originally written in Hebrew, and contrary to popular opinion, they were never lost. Michael Rood and Miles Jones explain how in the 3rd episode of Survival of the Hebrew Gospels. But before that, get your bread and wine ready to ring in the Sabbath with Michael right after this.
Clashing head-on with worshippers of the moon goddess Diana, and with those who made their living selling likenesses of her, Paul is surrounded in Ephesus by a rioting mob, bent on protecting their pagan traditions and their livelihoods from the truth of the gospel. Our world today is no different.
And this is exactly what Paul is teaching. He's teaching the Gentiles to not forsake Moses, but forsake all of their paganism and come back to the truth. That is Israel's job. That has been Israel's job from the very beginning.
Trouble in Ephesus by Michael Rood offers a sobering parallel to modern times. Learn how we can use Paul's example to expose the distorted rituals of modern Christianity that distract from the prophecy-fulfilling truth of Yeshua's birth, death, and resurrection. You won't see this teaching anywhere else, and it's not for sale, but you can get it as a thank you from Michael Rood for your love gift donation of $50. Donate $100 or more, and you'll also receive this beautiful box of God's promises. Over 100 of the Bible's most encouraging promises, kept in a beautiful glass case, featuring a scene from the Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem. Or for a gift of $300 or more, you'll receive the teaching, the glass box of promises, and this solid wood and silver-plated challah bread cutting board. This exquisite showpiece features beautiful silver-plated artwork and even includes an engraved bread knife. Get this collection now, available in December only. It's a thank you gift from Michael Rood in appreciation of your support of A Rood Awakening International. You'll get the Trouble in Ephesus teaching for a love gift donation of $50. The teaching and the glass box of promises for a gift of $100 or more. Or get everything plus the solid wood and silver-plated breadboard for a love gift donation of $300 or more. Get these gifts now while supplies last. Donate by phone at 800-788-7887 or visit monthlylovegift.com.
The last night that Yeshua was with his disciples, the Last Supper before the Passover was sacrificed, he took bread and he took wine. He said before that Abraham saw his day and rejoiced. But what does that mean? He saw his day and rejoiced. Well, it was the Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, that brought forth bread and wine to Abraham. He blessed the Most High with the blessing that Abraham taught Yitzhak, Yitzhak taught Yaakov, and is still spoken today. Whenever bread and wine is served at a Jewish table, whenever it is Sabbath, especially around the world, the bread and the wine are brought forth with this blessing. Baruch atah Yehovah, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, the creator of the fruit of the vine. And Yeshua then said, blessed are you, Yehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He said, this represents my body, which will be broken for you. This represents my shed blood that pays the sin penalty because of the broken covenant. As often as we do this, we do this in remembrance of him. So break the bread, share the wine, and we do this in remembrance of him until he comes. It was the 10th day of the month of the Aviv, the day that the high priest brought in the Passover lamb from the sheepfolds of Bethlehem into the city of Jerusalem. Yeshua had tens of thousands of his disciples outside of the gate, and as he approached, they began to cry out, Hoshiana, Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah. Blessed is he that comes in the name of Yehovah. The priest yelled at Yeshua, tell your disciples to shut up. And Yeshua said, I will not. If the rocks will be given a voice, the rocks will cry it out if these people do not cry this out. The rocks are crying it out. And I have with me in our studio Dr. Miles Jones. And Miles, I would like you to give us the background on this rock, which is crying out the name of Yehovah. Give us the background on this. Ladies and gentlemen, Miles Jones, linguist, doctor, who has done his exploration not only in the land of Midian in Arabia, but also the land of Israel, and now all over Europe, who is finding that the Hebrew Gospels have survived, and he's going to be laying these things out. Miles, tell us about this stone.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here. This is one of the most exciting discoveries I've ever experienced. When I received the pictures of this, and they came from Dr. Sung Hak Kim, he was able to get this artifact out because he was like a son to the Prince of Mecca. And he let him take these artifacts from the Royal Saudi Museum collection out of the country with him. Now, I translated this, and the first thing I saw was this picture on the back. And I called up the person who gave me the picture. So I was very excited, very excited. This is Yod-He. That's the name of God. That's the short form of the name of God. It's in the Hebrew Bible 49 times, almost 50 times. And so he told me, well, what does it say on the back? And I said, what back? Well, there was a picture right beside it that was vertical. And I looked at that and I said, Yod-He, Vav-He, this is the sacred name of God. It's probably it is the oldest artifact with the name of God on it, and it's likely to remain so. This is 14th century. It was found on the pilgrimage path to Mount Sinai in Midian, Arabia. It was not found at the mountain, but it was found on the pilgrimage path by Bedouins who took it to the Prince of Mecca, and that's where they got it. Now, remember, they didn't know what it said. So that rules out any kind of fraud. Nobody's, hey, you want to by this rock with the sacred name of God on it? No, they didn't know what it said. If they had, it probably would have never lost Saudi Arabia, probably would have disappeared, frankly. So I got to translate the oldest artifact with the name of God on it, and that was just an amazing culmination in my career. But Yehovah had more in store for me. This is the name that has been totally erased from modern Christianity. It was brought back in the Reformation Bibles. They started using the name of God again. It was erased by the Greek church in the New Testament. And then in the Second Reformation, they re-Romanized all of the Reformation Bibles, which changed the world as we know it, and erased the name of God from the Bible yet again. So in today's modern Bibles, you can hardly find one that has the name of God in it at all. So this is the greatest abomination that has ever occurred as far as religion goes. So this is those stones are literally crying out from the ground of Mount Sinai in Arabia. And as great accomplished that is, Yehovah had one even larger in store for me when I went to Israel, and I located the earliest copy of the Gospels in Hebrew. And we wanted to talk about that some so we would know what's in there.
Now, I have to say, Miles, that this is a museum cast. This is not the original from Dr. Kim. This was given to me by Andrew Jones, who has spent his time over 15,000 miles. Well, that was a year ago. Over 15,000 miles he traveled in northwest Saudi Arabia through the Arabian Peninsula and bringing back the most treasured video, photographs, drone footage of Mount Sinai, the altar of the golden calf, Elijah's cave, all these things, which is now available to the world, and this is just another treasure. So when people come to the Rood Awakening headquarters, they get to see this museum cast of the very stone, which has got to be the oldest relic on the planet. That it's in anyone's possession anyway. And comes from the museum in Arabia.
It comes from the royal collection of Saudi Arabia.
This is unbelievable. And they didn't even know that they were giving it to a Messianic believer, the doctor of the Sultan of Mecca, or the Prince of Mecca, and was given as a gift because of his love and care for him.
Yes, it was. So that was an amazing thing. They would not have been able to get it out if not. Now, I examined the original stone when we were filming for the Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus. I was able to show the people that were assembled for the filming the original rock and explain it. Dr. Kim was there. So I've seen it, and it's there is really no chance that this is a fraud. For one thing, no one knew what it said. Right. And I know the etymology of the letter, so I know it's like 14th century. So that's like a century or so after the Exodus. There were pilgrims. There were pilgrims that were coming to Mount Sinai from the south and from the north. So the Israelites, they went down south to Sheba, where they picked up the alphabet. We can trace this now. They picked up the alphabet from the Israelites that they had gotten at Mount Sinai, and they developed it into a beautiful Sabaean script. And then they went up to Canaan, to Israel, and all the countries of the region adopted the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, including the Greeks. They adopted the alphabet from the Hebrews. They have Hebrew names. They have the same order as the Hebrew alphabet and the same shapes as the Hebrew alphabet. Definitely, they adopted this from the Hebrews. They'll be misleading. They call it the Semitic alphabet, but it was the Hebrew alphabet, and it was disseminated to all the countries of the region. This is where alphabetic literacy started, right there at Mount Sinai. And so the scriptures come basically from this rock. Those in the footprints were the first literate acts of the Israelites, and the inscriptions at Mount Sinai prove it. They show it to be so. So what can top that? Well,
I think you're going to tell
Gospels.
us what's going to top this, because we started on this really the last couple of weeks, and we are excited to hear the rest of the story concerning, or as it stands at this point, because this is ongoing. You are continuing to uncover ancient Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels, and as is translated into different languages from the Hebrew.
More than I would have ever thought possible. So the doors are being thrown wide open. I started doing the research on the Hebrew Gospels. Everybody in the literature, every expert said no manuscript had survived. So I didn't even think, it didn't even know that I would find one until Yehovah literally took me by the hand and said, go to Israel and find the earliest manuscript of the Gospels in Hebrew. And I obeyed, and I went, and we found it. It wasn't even hard. I mean, when God's in charge, he just, in my experience, he just hands it to you on a silver platter. This is it. This is what I wanted you to do.
If other people found it, they'd want to ignore it because...
Yes, this is the big thing about the research, is that this is prohibited to the Jews, it's prohibited to the Greek Gentile church, the Christian church. So they ignore this massive amount of documentation that has survived. So they leave it all to me. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But so we just keep uncovering more and more and more. The whole history of the Messianic church, the whole history of the survival of the Hebrew Gospels and the Messianic church. They did not disappear in the 5th century, as the church is so fond of telling us. If you can put this slide up for me. We ended our last show talking about the Hebrew prefaces to the gospel, the Hebrew Gospels, that were written by Jerome. Okay, so Jerome knew all about this. He knew about the Messianic church moving up to Lombardy in the northern Italy, and he mentions it in the preface, and this really surprised me because it seems such an obscure reference that the gospel was already written for those in Judea and Matthew in Lombardy. So Jerome, and who would know better than him, he translated the Hebrew Gospels into Latin and Greek when he wrote these prefaces. So he says Matthew was in Lombardy, straight here. You couldn't hardly get a better witness. So their Bible was the Rahman Bible. Actually, their Bible had derived from the first compilation of the Bible. The Old and New Testament, that as we think of it today, was compiled in like 150, the 2nd century. That was early on. These people still had the original manuscripts of these letters and books of the Bible. They had the Hebrew Gospels, and they knew how to read it. So they compiled it into the Italic Bible, which spread throughout the world to the fullest extent of Christianity. A compilation of that, which included the Hebrew Gospels. And this was the Bible of the Jewish Messianic church that moved up. And they were Hebrews, they were Gentiles in it by now. So it moved up to Lombardy and in that area of northern Italy. And they had their own communion. So this ancient Bible, remember, there's a direct connection. This was their Bible, the Itala, the oldest compilation of the Bible, centuries older than Jerome's Vulgate, or Eusebius' Greek compilation of the Bible. And then Lucian of Antioch came along in another century or so, and he compiled the Bible in Greek based on the Itala and the Hebrew Gospels that were still out there. And this book was called the Received Text. So these are the two oldest Bibles in the history of Christianity, if you will, or the Messianic church. These were the Bibles that were used centuries before Rome ever put out its own versions. Now, these people, the Waldensians, they were called, in upper Italy, in the Alps, they had later on, they translated the Itala into their own native language, which was Romant. And we still have those Bibles. And remember, keep in mind that tens of thousands of Waldensians, the neo-Messianic church, were crucified, they were slaughtered for their faith, and they continued to guard and preserve the earliest copies of the Bible known to man, from the Itala and their gospel in Romant. And what I wanted to show you, which we're going to talk about at more length in another segment, Their Waldensian Bible, the Rahman Gospel, the oldest Waldensian Bible, about 6 of them have survived. But the oldest one in the Paris manuscript, 8086, there is no John 6:4. Passover was nigh. This is substantial evidence that the oldest compilation of the Bible, the Itala, translated into Rahman, did not have that passage in it. And we had spoken about that the Greeks changed things. And they did. They did change things. So
we're going to have to dig into that because, as you know, this is what John Lorquette and Nehemiah Gordon presented at Passover this last year. And they showed us for the first time the world got to see these ancient Greek manuscripts, one of which was secreted away in a monastery on a mountain on a Greek island. And these manuscripts, 9 in total at that point, that indicated that John 6:4, those words, and Passover of the Feast of the Jews was nigh, was not in the earliest text. And now you have found in the Rahman version that this was attempted to be wiped out. The Roman Catholic Church was slaughtering, murdering these people and
burning their books with them.
Burning their books. And so they ended up memorizing the scripture. Everyone in the community was required to memorize so that when they went through and they burned all their books, they could reassemble the Bible.
That's actually true. The preachers of the Waldensian Church were required to memorize Matthew, the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, of course, in their own language. But so they really did that. Each one was required to memorize it. So that actually happened. Here's a page from the Waldensian manuscript, and this is from John 1:1 in the Rahman book of John. It says, "In the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with God, and the Son was God." This becomes a marker of the Hebrew manuscript tradition. So one of the exciting things we found is it's not just the Hebrew Gospels of Catalan, it's not just the Shem Tov manuscript, but there are other manuscripts that come from this manuscript tradition. Hebrew Gospels to the Itala Bible, to the received texts of Lucian of Antioch in Greek, all outside of the Roman system. All of this outside. And these people martyred themselves in order to keep it outside the grass, in order to preserve it and keep it. So this is a marker of that tradition. I want to show you, here are 3 books from the Hebrew manuscript tradition. Well, 2 of them rather. The Rahman book, in the beginning was the Son was with God, and the Son was God. In the Hebrew Gospels of Catalonia, it says, "In the beginning was the Son, Eloah, and the Son of El was with El." Almost the same thing as it says in the Rahman Bible. So this becomes, along with those prefaces, which says the early Hebrew Gospels were already written in Hebrew, become markers of this Hebrew manuscript tradition. There will be other books. We've just discovered the manuscript 534 from the pages that Nehemiah had in the Vatican junk box. Well, those 5 pages go with the manuscript that's there somewhere. Right. You know,
they fell out. They didn't read Hebrew, so they threw it in the junk box with other Hebrew manuscripts.
That is another manuscript of the Gospels in Hebrew with all the correct vowel pointings of the name Yehovah. But they're different than the ones we have. So this is another entry into the Hebrew manuscript tradition. Very important. And here it is straight from the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. So you can see the page. You can say you saw it on Michael Rood, that you saw pages directly from the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, which we have authenticated as coming from a first century source. So this is really exciting stuff. It is really hard to get over how exciting this is. But the way this worked, I want you to look at these are the Reformation Bibles, which changed the world. In 30 years of the introduction of these Bibles, 2/3 of Europe became Protestant. They could finally read the Bible and know what was in it, and it didn't match what they had been told. And so they said, I want the real word. And the word of Yehovah has a power to it that has been demonstrated over and over and over in history. And we now have that documented, that the Neo-Messianic church, and Herod mingled with the blood of the Jewish Christian church. Yes, they had differences in doctrine, but always and everywhere, the main goal was to restore the church of the Messiah of the first century. That was always their goal, to get back to the dynamism that they had, the daily miracles that they had in the early church. And they were.
Earnestly contend for the faith once delivered to the saints. As Jude said, and that's what really brought me into it. Reading the book of Acts and seeing the miracles, seeing the power of God, and seeing that these people were these Jewish believers were giving their lives to get the gospel of the kingdom out to the Gentile world, and the persecution that they endured because they were attempting to do it. First of all, by the Jews, by the Pharisees, who didn't want the Gentiles to hear. Unless the Gentiles jump through our rabbinic hoops, they can't even be saved. I mean, that's an underlying theme in the book of Acts.
Yes.
But says, no, that's not the way it is. And it took them a while to really uncover and to discover what God was doing, because they said, seeing how these Gentile Roman soldiers spoke in tongues just like we did, it's obvious that God has made a way. We just don't understand it yet.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was passed on, and the miracles were passed on. The Messianic church created miracles wherever it went. It didn't die in the first century, as is often said, that the canon of the Bible is closed, there are no more miracles, that's all done. It isn't done. It never was done.
Right.
It's just been the Hebrew Gospels have been the most targeted book for extinction throughout history, because the Jews were not going to touch it. It was prohibited. It was blamed for all their persecution, and the Gentile Christians certainly weren't going to acknowledge it. It was forbidden to them. So when you see these manuscripts, they're done by Messianic Jews throughout the centuries, Messianic believers throughout the centuries that were carrying the message and carefully preserving this word. Because really, the people were hunted to extinction there, and their books were burned at every turn. So the fact that it has survived is a true miracle. That's what makes it so exciting to be the person that's translating the Hebrew Gospels. And what they tell us is amazing, because they tell us some really incredible things.
Miles, we're going to have to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to dig into this, because we've got some problems that we need to solve in the gospel record, that we're bereft of the information because we just didn't have the original documents, and no train of the original documents. We just had the massage documents that came out of Eusebius and Rome. So we're going to be back in just a minute. And as we do with every broadcast, we give you out there an opportunity to give your tithes, your offerings, your thanksgiving to the Almighty for His deliverance and bringing the word of truth to you, opening your eyes, turning you from darkness to light. Only you can respond appropriately to Him. We don't know what miracles the Almighty had to do to reach into your heart and into your life, but we are thankful to be a part of that. And we are being a part of so many miracles that are happening in people's lives around the world in so many languages now. We need your help. You're hearing it in English, but this is soon going to be in Spanish. It will be in Chinese. And with all of these operations, it takes a great deal of physical resources to do so. So if this is a provision for you, please be a provision for those who have not yet heard, those who need to hear, and you are going to be the reason they do hear. You can pick up your reward on the sea of fire and glass when the smoke clears. We'll be back in just a moment. This is your time. We are back with Dr. Miles Jones. He is the professor who is teaching us history, geography, and taking us back and letting us get a glimpse of ancient Hebrew gospel documents that have been hidden away for generations upon generations. Miles?
For 500 years, they've been hidden in the Vatican archives. The last time they were used was during the blood moons, the 4 blood moons after the Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews from Spain.
I think of this, 1492, what transpired in the diaries of Christopher Columbus. He said that his goal was to take the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. And that's quite something coming from a man who attributed his life to being especially ordained by God because his mother, being pregnant with him, had morning sickness. And so they were on their way to a Passover Seder, and she was sick with morning sickness, so they turned back. They didn't go to the Passover Seder that night, and that night everyone at the Passover Seder were killed.
Wow.
And so, it's Columbus. And so we've got the Messianic Jews in...
A lot of people don't know that part of the story, that he was very definitely a Messianic Jew. That's why he had all of his family records burned so no one could find out. This was at the height of the Inquisition. And when he left, I didn't know that quote about him carrying the Gospels to. Yeah. But we know that he left on ships full of Jews fleeing the expulsion and Messianics fleeing the Inquisition. And he left with a Greek map and a Hebrew translator, fully expecting to run into the 10 lost tribes. So the Messianics came to the colonies, came to the Americas on the very first ship of Columbus, and they brought their Hebrew Gospels with them. So the New World was inordinately populated by Messianics and Messianic believers and Jews. Some they lived together as a community. Sometimes there's a fine line between the two. But about 15% of the population of the early colonies was Jewish in South America and North America too. But Jamaica was as high as 50%. So they had a really, really deep part to play in the New World from the very beginning, from the very first ship of Columbus. So they brought their Hebrew Gospels with them, and what we have here, if you can show this slide, is one of the markers of the Hebrew manuscript tradition. There are 3, 4. This is one of them. They often, where it says Son of Man in the Greek Gospels, it says Son of the Virgin oftentimes in the Hebrew Gospels. So here it is in the Hebrew Gospels, Matthew 24:30, and also it's said that way in the Roman Gospel.
Okay.
So these are markers. You see these markers.
So read that for those of us who are not fluent in Hebrew handwriting. Right.
Well, it says right down here. It has Ben, son of Ha-Betula, son of the Virgin. So this is straight out of the Hebrew Gospels. It's a marker like others. So many of the things that are in the Gospels have been suppressed. The whole Gospel has been suppressed, but the things that we find out are remarkable. One of them is simply they suppressed the word menorah, which was designed by Jehovah himself. So when Yeshua says, you do not light a lamp to hide it under a bushel, but put it on a menorah so that it gives light to all. Now, doesn't that give you a much more truer symbolic sense of what he's trying to say? And in Revelation, what's the first part of the vision revelation of
He's
John?
Walking among the 7-branch lampstand.
Right, the lampstand.
Not candlesticks.
Right, not candlesticks.
It didn't even exist back then.
It's a menorah, and it is a menorah in the Hebrew Gospels, because we actually have part of the Hebrew Gospels of Revelation.
Right.
So, and through that, you're seeing the Son of the Virgin, the Son of Man, Yeshua himself. So here's one of the things that's very common in every page of the Hebrew Bible. It's called paranimosia, and they call it Hebrew word puns, but they really aren't puns. They are meant to be beautiful and memorable. What they are is you take roots with the same basic root, but they have a little different meaning. So here's an example. It says Matthew 1:21, you shall call his name Yeshua, for he shall save his people. In Hebrew, that you save is Yoshia. They come from the same root, because Yeshua means salvation. So you shall call his name Yeshua, for he shall Yoshia his people. He shall save his people. So this is part of his name. You find this usually does not translate. So you lose all of that meaning and that relevance.
Right, and we finally get it in whether it's Greek or English or Aramaic, it makes no sense whatsoever. You should call his name Yeshua,
for he will Yoshia his people. He will save his people.
Right.
So that's what it was, and that's just kind of one of the things. Here's one of the things from the Hebrew Gospels. Some of them are huge things, some of them are small things. Here's one that is my favorite, that when he's returning, he has risen from the dead, and he goes back into the world of his believers. He meets the two Marys on the road, and in the Greek Gospel it says, he says to them, all hail.
Right.
Which is a Greek.
Like Hail Caesar.
Right, that is a Roman military salute, which was incidentally adopted by Adolf Hitler as the Nazi salute. That's where it came from. I hate to throw innuendo in here, but it is true. That
Hail Caesar, Hail Hitler.
Right. So I can guarantee you that is not what Yeshua said. They were required to use a phrase that had the name of God in it, actually. And so we have in the Hebrew Gospels, he says, God is our salvation. Now remember, he's using a word that's a variation on his own name. God is our salvation. In the Shem Tov manuscript, it says the same thing. It says God is our deliverance, same thing. So these are Hebrew.
Right, the translation.
These are Hebrew. The Greek is nothing. You know, they got it all wrong.
Yehovah Yoshia.
Right.
Form of that.
They just changed it. So we're at, and they knew all of these things. Yehovah, Yeshua, they knew all these things were coming to pass. But unless you have the Hebrew perspective, we don't follow it. There's something missing. We can't see it. So in Sukkot, year 30 AD, at the climax of the week-long festival of tabernacles, Sukkot, they go down to the pool of Siloam, the spring of Gihon, and they take living water, as it says in Isaiah, living water. Living water is flowing water, because if it stops, it becomes stagnant eventually. So they pull the living water out of it, and so this is called the water of salvation. Or, in Hebrew, is called from the Mayane HaYeshua, right? It's from the springs of salvation, right? So it is literally the water of Yeshua, the living water that they're bringing. Well, then they bring it back up to the temple and pour red wine into it, which symbolized blood. So now this is the blood of Yeshua. And they pour it out onto the altar. And at that very moment, this nervy young man in the audience stood up and in a loud voice says, all those who thirst, come to me, and I will give you living water flowing out of your center, the center of your being. And then they poured onto the altar, and remember, they're pouring onto the altar the blood of Yeshua, the blood of salvation, the water of salvation, which is now blood, the blood of Yeshua. And everyone in the whole assembled Jewry from all over the world says in one voice, Yehovah is our Yeshua. Yehovah is our salvation. In Hebrew, Yehovah Yoshia Chenu. Yehovah is our Yeshua, our salvation. Now, tell me that's a coincidence. That's no coincidence.
And the people cried out, is not this the Messiah? And there was a division among them. They said, will the Messiah come out of Galilee?
Yeah.
There was a division, but yet that proclamation, and that those who had ears to hear, those people, they understood.
Yes.
There it is. This is what we've been rehearsing for 1,000 years.
Right, the shadow
and
pictures.
He has just laid it out.
Yep.
He has just declared it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you don't get these things until you understand the Hebrew perspective. And you're not going to get that from the Greek Bible. So many times you see it in the Hebrew Gospels. And yeah, of course, that's right. That makes perfect sense. You know, the menorah is put back. You know, the one icon that God himself designed and gave us, that's actually put back into the Bible. The name of God is back in the Bible. The next day, they brought him the woman that was caught in the act of adultery. Now, this is something that you probably do not know, but that parable was not actually put into the Bible until like 500 AD. Even after the time of Constantine.
The wandering parable.
It's called the wandering parable. And the reason that it was preserved, and we have plenty of documentation of this, is that it was in the Hebrew Gospels. It was in the Hebrew Gospels. And this is commented on several times by early church fathers when they comment on this parable, and each one acknowledges that it's in the Hebrew Gospels. So finally, it makes its way into the canon of Scripture. And it wandered because they didn't really know where to put it. You know, it finally lodged in the early part of John. But this is probably the most well-known parable in the Bible. And we can thank the Hebrew Gospels for its preservation. This is not the only thing, but it is a very well documented item in history, so we know this is accurate. But how many other things were preserved for us by the Messianic Church, who preserved their Gospels very carefully. Throughout history, the Messianic believers have played crucial parts in history. We just talked about the colonization of the New World. Crucial part. I mean, you know, Columbus was a Messianic believer, and he had plenty of them on his ship. We have their manifests. We know this, right? So they played a part throughout history. The Inquisition followed them to the New World, and they were burning people. Even in the United States, they burned people. They burned Messianic believers to death in Santa Fe.
Right, yeah.
And an interesting story is they had it all set up in New Orleans, which was under Spanish control at the time. But the people in New Orleans were a very rowdy, rebellious bunch. They had the dungeons and the torture materials all set up. You can see them today. You can go in. They had it all set up underground. And they sent the Grand Inquisitor to New Orleans. And these rowdy members of the New Orleans population met him with an armed guard and turned him around and put him on the ship and sent him back to Spain. So the Inquisition never arrived in New Orleans.
It got turned around at New Orleans.
They turned him around and put him back on the ship and sent him back where he came from. So that's probably more the spirit of the country that we live in today, I would hope.
Right.
So this is, there are so many things that the Hebrew Gospel tell us about the Messianic Church and the effect that these Gospels had on the Bible as we know it today. A lot of things would have been lost. For example, the earliest Greek manuscripts do not have the Great Commission in them. The last verse of Matthew, not in the earliest manuscripts in Greek. The last 12 verses of Mark, not in the earliest Greek manuscripts. Now, please don't take my word for this. Go online, Google it. You'll find out. I dig deep, and I don't say anything that's not true. So they did survive in the Hebrew Gospels. Now, there may have been other documents that they had. I don't know if they survived because they were in the Hebrew Gospels. But the point is they were in the Hebrew Gospels. And therefore, the Great Commission itself was restored to us, very likely because of that. Because they actually, they all back in that time knew the Hebrew Gospels were there and they were authoritative. So when they had problems with the Greek canon, they would go back to the Hebrew Gospels to resolve differences in the Greek canon. That's acknowledged by numerous of the early church fathers.
This is still what we do today. When we look at the English text and we see there's something that's not quite right. This doesn't really work. It doesn't work with the culture. It's inconsistent with the context. Then we go back into the Greek and we look at the Greek. Oh, there it is. Or then we go back and look at Matthew, the Hebrew Matthew. This has been the source of so many clarifications that write in English and in Greek. In the Greek text, they write in the margin, meaning uncertain. They knew what the words were, but they had no idea what they meant. It turned out that they were simple figures of speech in Hebrew that were in the Hebrew Matthew.
Right. They also would write in the Codex Sinaiticus, they would write scholia, there were notes, and they would say, well, it says in the Hebrew Gospels this. It doesn't say the city of the great king, it says the city of God in the Hebrew Gospels. So there are several scholia like that, written in the margin of the Codex Sinaiticus. So it's had a tremendous effect that has been suppressed. They have suppressed the Messianic Church, their achievements, the Messianic Gospels, the importance of them throughout history, and as well as, killing the people and burning their books. But when the parable of the woman taken in adultery is really the most well documented. We wouldn't have that parable if it weren't for the Hebrew Gospels, and probably a number of other things that were saved by the Hebrew Gospels. In particular, the woman taken in adultery, what they would do is they would take him in the courtyard of the temple, and they would fill a chalice with red wine, which was blood, and they would take some dust from the paving stones where the feet of the apostles had walked. So now this chalice represents the blood of the apostles. And they would take the woman or man, it's the same for either one, and they had been caught in the act of adultery, they had been caught in adultery, they would have them swear by the blood of the apostles to their testimony. And the penalty for that was death. God would punish them by death if they lied. When they brought the woman to Yeshua, he was actually in the courtyard of the temple where such judgments take place. That's in John 8:1. And when he bent down and wrote in the dirt, every Hebrew there knew exactly what he was doing. He was the priest preparing the chalice. Would the Pharisees swear under penalty of death before Yehovah by the blood of the prophets that they were truthful in what they had accused her of? And one by one, they snuck away. So if you want to understand the truth of the Bible, it's the Hebrew perspective that's going to get you there, not the Greek one.
So this is a tradition that is found in the early writing of the early church then?
It's a very well-established tradition that we know this is how the Jews established in a court of law, so to speak, the veracity of someone's testimony. They would swear on the blood of the prophets.
So that really is an adaptation of what it tells us in Numbers, the trial of the suspected adulterous woman then,
right.
and an adaptation of that. Miles, we've got to go, because we've come to the time of the end for this episode, but we haven't gotten into John 6:4 and those things that were added to the scripture in order to try to substantiate the teachings of a heretic of Rome.
And that's critically important.
Okay, we're going to be back next week. We're going to hang in here with Miles Jones going to be back, and we're going to explore the Gospels from the Hebrew language, and we're going to make some amazing discoveries. So thank you for being with us, and remember that Yehovah, our God, loves you, and he wants you to open your heart to him. He is calling you, as it says in the book of the Revelation, and the Spirit and the bride say, come. Everyone who thirsts can come. It's free. It is by grace. Our salvation is by grace through faith, and faith in our Lord, Yeshua, Messiah, who paid our sin for us, who died for us, and he has made us priests and kings. And that is how we are going to live and serve and reign with him in the millennial reign after the resurrection, after the last trump, when we are gathered together on the sea of fire and glass, and we come back to reign with him and establish his kingdom. This is a promise that all the prophets looked forward to, This is the promise of the Scripture, the promise of the renewed covenant, and you are invited. You are invited. Heavenly Father, we thank you for you preserving the word, your words for us for this day and time. That men of God, holy men of God, spoke as they were moved by the Spirit, and that we have their testimony. You preserved it for us with all of the wiles of the adversary, all of his deceit, all of his destruction, all of the people that he murdered to keep us from having the truth of your word. You have prevailed. And we thank you for the blood of your saints that was poured out so that we could have a copy in a language that we can understand, and that you have preserved the original for us in so many ways so that we can know your will. And we thank you for these things. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Have a good Sabbath. Have a good week, and we'll see you back here with Miles Jones next week. And we're going to be digging into John 6:4 and some other treasures.
The key to the truth of the Gospels.
Amen.